Welcome, everybody. And as you may know, many of our church family are away on retreat, but we are here, the remnant of the church, the faithful remnant. So welcome. And if you see me doing anything wrong this morning, feel free just to call me out on it. So I work in a jail, and I live in Palo Alto. So I work with people who have pretty much had everything stripped from them, have lost their jobs, often their friends, sometimes their family, even their future. And then I live with people who have almost every privilege you can think of: pension plan, good jobs, healthcare, and so on. Maybe like some of you, I grew up in a family where education was seen as the key to security, to happiness, to a future. Many of you are aware, I'm sure, that in America today, we go into massive debt to afford education. Sometimes we move house across the country into incredibly expensive houses to have education. The stress of trying to succeed in school is behind the startling statistic that for high schoolers, including locally, and college students, suicide is the third most common cause of death. How does God see all of this, and what would God say to us? We who live within a stone's throw of Stanford University and a stone's throw of communities that struggle to find food each day. What would God say to those of us who've struggled to succeed in school, who feel maybe we don't measure up? What would God say to the people I work with in the jail who never even finished high school? What does all of this say about how we measure security and our worth? And how sometimes we discard people who don't measure up, either consciously or subconsciously? Well, Paul the Apostle, who wrote the epistle today, as usual, has something to say to us about this. And that's what I want to focus on this morning. Paul is one of the most educated people in the history of literature, and his writings have stood up under the scrutiny of 2,000 years of scholarship. Paul was also a man who was a little over the top in terms of drive and passion. And some people, including myself, have occasionally thought of him as kind of annoying. He's zealous, and now sitting in jail, he's writing to his friends, the church in Philippi, to warn them against teachers who are trying to teach them that in order to be good Christians, you have to follow a certain set of rules and regulations. So what does Paul start with? He says, well, if anyone has reason to be confident in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, a member of the people of Israel, a tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church, as to righteousness, blameless. To the recipients of this letter, he just put out his resume, and it's a resume that beats all the competition. So let's review Paul's resume briefly with the eyes and ears of a first-century person. In his customary tone, Paul says that he has more reason than any of us to be confident in the flesh, that is, human stuff. His first resume point says, I was circumcised on the 8th day. So his family observed the Jewish law to circumcise babies 8 days after they were born, and they followed it to the letter, devoutly and strictly. From the moment he was born, even infant Paul did everything right. You can't beat that. Second resume point, a member of Israel, God's chosen people. He didn't convert him, he was born into it. I believe I am sadly ineligible to run for US president, because although a citizen, I was not born in the US. Where we are born is a way human society has decided how to judge worthiness. So don't get born in the wrong places. Third point, Paul is from the tribe of Benjamin, and this is a source of pride. Benjamin was one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and it had this kind of cool factor. It originated, as all the tribes did, from the sons of Jacob. But Benjamin was the 12th son, the youngest son, and he was born to Jacob's favorite wife. And so Benjamites had this thing, maybe it's a youngest child thing, the favored baby of the family. In fact, Israel's first ever king, King Saul, came from this tribe. So it's definitely an elite group, and they knew it. Fourth point, he was a Hebrew of Hebrews. Paul is saying, I'm pure blood from pure blood. Most of the people in Philippi, where Paul was writing this letter to, were of mixed background, heritage, and race. And Paul is saying, my heritage is pure pedigree. This way of judging people still seems to be carrying on. Fifth point, as to the law, I am a Pharisee. So Paul is moving on from his heritage, what he was born with, to what he has accomplished in life. Calling himself a Pharisee was not the derogatory term we might imagine, given all we know about how Jesus got on with them. A Pharisee to the Jews describes that group of people who are just so educated, so elite in their thinking, their legal minds, so rigorous in their knowledge of religious and legal literature. They were considered the elite of their day. So think Harvard Law School or Stanford. Think someone who's scarily intelligent, and not only scarily intelligent, but sadly knows that they are. Sixth point, as to zeal, I am a persecutor of the church. Now for us, the church, this may seem a bit of a downer. And to the Philippian church readers, too, they may have squirmed in their seats reading this point, as they, too, were experiencing great persecution. But it is actually a plus on his resume. Not only did Paul have a great mind, intelligence, elite education, he was a man of action, too. Paul had a vision for how the world should be, and he was about making that so. Think a cross between Bill Gates and a Navy SEAL. His zeal, Paul's brilliance, drove him to extremes. He was consumed with energy and ambition to eradicate everything he saw as threatening rightness of religion and society. It brings to mind for me some of the Nazi persecutors in the 1940s in Europe, some of them brilliant minds, consumed though with passion and energy to drive the Jewish people to extinction through propaganda, persecution, and violence, and their flawed arguments captured the hearts and minds of many. And we continue to see that today. Last resume point, Paul says, as to righteousness, I am blameless. Well, this man does not hold back. It kind of sums it all up. Considering a human point of view and the qualifications recognized in that day, Paul's resume was in fact perfect. Nothing was missing. His background, his heritage, his grades, his results, his follow-through, his energy, all of it was there and pretty much perfect. Whether it's academic success, business success, ministry, family, whatever it is for us, we all have strengths and talents that we rely on and put our faith in for the future. most of us have a version of Paul's resume tucked up our sleeves to pull out to prove our worth. But how did Paul go on? With all this brilliance and stature and success, as he now sits in a jail cell, how does he reflect upon it all? He says, "Whatever gains I have had, I now regard as loss because of Christ." These things that we've just listed are loss because there's something better than social standing, better than birth privilege, better than cultural superiority, better than zeal, better than years and years of education and working up to the top, better than striving, and it's knowing Jesus, knowing God, knowing the power of the death and the coming back to life of Jesus Christ. And the word Paul uses in verse 8 for loss, I regard everything as loss, means these things that he's listed can actually be a disadvantage or potentially damaging. So this impressive list, this great resume of Paul that he and his family sacrificed money, energy, time to obtain, can actually be damaging to him and others. Can actually be an obstacle to coming to recognize where true, lasting, deep down peace and wholeness actually arise from. But Paul, because he's Paul, goes further, and he says, "Actually, I regard them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him." As if wanting to put a cherry on the top of the cake, Paul uses a word, rubbish, with shock value to the listener that our English translators have actually thoughtfully translated rubbish. The word rubbish is, in the original, more like a four-letter word beginning with S that you flush down a toilet. So I will leave you to fill that in. Likening this impeccable background to something you'd flush down a toilet in order to know Jesus. Now, I don't want to make anyone feel ill, but can you imagine flushing away your degree and the thousands of dollars you spent trying to get it and all that sacrifice? Or your children's degrees? Can you imagine flushing your resume away, your work experience, all your achievements and successes that you have listed? Can you imagine whatever it is today that you rest on, your abilities to make things happen, your can-do mentality, the hours of work, the years of striving? Can you imagine them in the toilet, slowly disappearing down the tube? As this happens for Paul, he finds that not only his standing has shifted, has vanished, in fact, but something better replaces it, and it is hope for the future. Because his hope for the future is no longer in getting everything done, getting everything right, and all the ducks in a row, because now his hope for the future is based on Jesus and the power that raised Jesus from the dead. And that power is something we can never work hard enough to get. It's a power that transcends anything you're listing on your resume. And as he sits there in his jail cell, contemplating his own potential execution, writing to a church that is being persecuted to death, Paul says, not only did Jesus rise, but we who follow him will too. It's not something we can ever work on our own to get, and it's something that would be the star point of anyone's resume. So what do we do in light of this new hope? The new hope of life after death. Paul says, well, we press on. We press on towards the goal, and we don't give up because we know the end of the story. Back to those I work with in the jail, right? None of them, very few of them, have the accolades and qualifications we have. And when they read something like this is over-the-top good news. Because those who have had everything stripped away often come to a deeper understanding and awareness of where true hope and true faith are anchored. For those of us not sitting in a jail cell this morning, maybe some of us do need to flush away our hope, our dependence on human attributes and achievements. Maybe we need to flush away our hope that human institutions and human work are going to save us and our society. My exhortation is simply to you next time you're in the bathroom and you flush. Take a moment to ask God, what do I need to let go of? I wonder if our tendency as a society towards hopelessness comes because our foundation and hope is, to begin with, in human achievements and attributes, the flesh, as Paul says. And I wonder if we flush that away, it might allow our hope to grow, be refocused and centered in Jesus again and his power over death. Might that foundation give us the energy, the hope we need to press on and not give up? Might that foundation free up space in our heart and our soul to believe that we too are destined for resurrection? May it be so, my friends. Amen.